The United States military drops multi-million-dollar precision bombs, coordinates complex cyber attacks, and imposes the most suffocating economic sanctions on Earth. Yet they cannot break Iran. In fact, right now, Iran is the one paralyzing global trade. To understand how Washington ended up in this trap, we have to look at how this animosity started. In 1953, the US and British intelligence agencies orchestrated a coup to overthrow Iran's democratically elected prime minister. In his place, they installed the Shah, a monarch who operated with heavy Western backing. For decades, the actual profits from Iran's massive oil fields flowed out of the country, building a deep, lingering resentment among the public. By 1979, the Iranian public reached a breaking point. They overthrew the Shah, and the fury directed at decades of foreign interference culminated when revolutionaries stormed the U.S. embassy, taking American diplomats hostage. Shortly after, the Iran-Iraq War erupted. Saddam Hussein launched devastating chemical weapon attacks against Iranian soldiers and civilians. Iran pleaded with the United Nations and the international community for help, but the world watched in silence. Those events cemented a harsh reality into the Iranian psyche. They realized they could never trust the West, and nobody was coming to save them. Knowing they lacked the firepower to win a conventional war against a superpower, they engineered a completely asymmetric survival strategy. This map shows Iran's primary physical defense: its massive size. The country is roughly 4 times larger than Iraq, but more importantly, the western edge is guarded by the Zagros Mountains, and the north by the Alborz Mountains. These imposing rock walls act as a natural, impassable shield against a ground invasion. Iran hones its defense deep inside the rock itself. Beneath millions of tons of granite, they have hollowed out complex networks of missile silos, train lines, and drone bases that are largely immune to aerial bombardment. This map illustrates what Iran calls the mosaic doctrine. Instead of a single, centralized military command that the US could destroy with one strike, Iran fractured its military across 31 autonomous provinces. If the top leadership is wiped out, each of those 31 pieces can operate independently and continue the fight. This data visualization shows the financial reality of that strategy. Iran produces simple, highly effective drones that cost about $2,000 each. To stop them, the US military has to fire Patriot or THAAD interceptor missiles. A single interceptor can cost upwards of $15 million. By leveraging their massive, mountainous geography and mass-producing cheap, decentralized weapons, the Iranian military turns America's reliance on incredibly expensive, high-tech systems into a severe financial liability. But physical defenses and drone swarms are only part of the playbook. The Iranian leadership watched what happened to Saddam Hussein in Iraq and Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. Both men surrendered their weapons programs to the West. Both were eventually overthrown and killed. This vertical gauge chart tracks the progression of Iran's uranium enrichment. For civilian nuclear power, you only need to enrich uranium to about 3 to 5%. Today, Iran has pushed that number to 60%. From there, it is a very short technical leap to cross the 90% threshold required for weapons-grade material.
To ensure this progress cannot be easily wiped out, the actual work happens deep underground. Facilities like Fordo and Natanz house dense, endless rows of advanced aluminum centrifuge tubes, protected by layers of mountain rock and reinforced concrete. The US and Israel have repeatedly tried to sabotage this infrastructure. They've deployed the Stuxnet computer virus to spin centrifuges until they break, and they've dropped heavy munitions from stealth bombers. But Iran simply shifts its operations to backup bunkers and starts over. The nuclear program serves a highly specific purpose. It forces the US to hesitate. By holding the capacity to build a weapon just weeks away, Iran maintains a geopolitical life insurance policy against regime change. This flowchart maps out the foundation of American global influence, the petrodollar system. Gulf nations agree to sell their massive oil reserves exclusively in US dollars. Those dollars are then heavily reinvested into US Treasury bonds and the American economy. In return for keeping the global demand for the dollar high, the United States guarantees absolute military protection for the Gulf states. It is a direct exchange of economic loyalty for a security shield. But this map zooms into the Strait of Hormuz, revealing Iran's ultimate leverage point. This navigable channel is incredibly narrow, only about 10 kilometers wide at its tightest point. Yet 20% of the entire world's oil supply must pass through this tiny bottleneck. Iran sits right on the edge of this strait. By attacking or seizing just a handful of commercial ships, they cause marine insurance companies to pull their coverage. The ships stop sailing, the oil stops flowing, and the petrodollar cycle grinds to a halt. To amplify that pressure, Iran has positioned its cheap drones to target the critical desalination plants that supply drinking water to U.S. allies in the Gulf. They are hitting the very countries the U.S. promised to protect. By threatening the global oil supply and the drinking water of neighboring states, Iran shifts the conflict entirely. They avoid a direct military confrontation with the U.S., opting instead to hold the American financial empire hostage over a 10-kilometer strip of water. The United States now faces an exhausting geopolitical stalemate. Billions of dollars in airstrikes have not broken the Iranian military structure, and heavy funding for internal opposition groups has ended with protests violently crushed by the regime. This diagram displays the global consequences of a U.S. total war. Below the ocean surface, critical subsea cables route the world's data and banking traffic. If severed alongside a mined Strait of Hormuz, the resulting disruptions would trigger a massive spike in global inflation. If pushed into a corner where survival is no longer an option, the conflict could easily cross the nuclear threshold. That level of desperation would drag in neighboring nations and global superpowers who want no part in a direct war. After decades of sanctions and military posturing, Washington is finding that overwhelming kinetic firepower cannot solve the problem. They face an adversary that has weaponized its rugged geography, hijacked global trade routes, and built an entire military doctrine around an absolute instinct for survival.